The punch came so fast that my uncle dropped his drink. My mother had been smiling 1 second earlier. Then she stepped toward me, raised her fist and said, "Dodge this, weakling." I didn't understand why everyone went quiet. We were standing in my sister's backyard, 20 people around a grill, when my mother decided to prove something nobody had asked her to prove. She had spent the last year telling relatives she was a black belt fighter. She liked demonstrating little moves at family gatherings. Nobody questioned her. I usually stayed out of it. That afternoon, though, she kept watching me. I'm Ethan and I was 34 then. Most of my family thought I worked in logistics for the government. I never corrected them. My mother threw the punch. I moved once. 7 seconds later, her arm was pinned behind her back, her shoulder pressed gently against my chest. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to stop her. Nobody spoke. She twisted her head enough to look at me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear replace the confidence in her eyes. Because my mother had just attacked the one person in that yard who knew exactly how to end a fight without starting another one. And she still had no idea who I really was. My mother pulled her arm free and immediately laughed. "Okay," she said, rubbing her wrist. "You got lucky." Nobody laughed with her. I stepped away and picked up my drink from the patio table. My hand was steady, but I could feel everyone watching me. She had expected me to stumble backward. Instead, I had reacted before I even thought about it. That was the problem. For years, my family had known me as the quiet son. I skipped arguments. I rarely raised my voice. At gatherings, I was usually the guy standing near the kitchen helping with dishes while everyone else talked. My mother took that as weakness. She started making little comments about it after I came home from work. "You need to toughen up. You're too soft. You wouldn't last a day in a real fight." I always let it go. What she didn't know was that my job had trained me to recognize movement before most people even realized a fight had started. I couldn't tell them that. Not at the dinner table. Not over burgers and potato salad. So I just smiled and said, "Maybe I got lucky." My mother stared at me for several seconds. Then she smiled back. But something in her expression had changed. She wasn't embarrassed anymore. She was curious. And that worried me more than the punch. My mother didn't mention the fight again that afternoon. That almost made it worse. She went back to talking with my aunts, laughing louder than usual, but every so often I caught her looking at me. I noticed other things too. Her black belt certificate was still sitting in a plastic frame near the back door. I had seen it before but never closely. This time, I noticed the school name printed across the bottom. It was a local studio. Nothing unusual about that. Except the date. She had told everyone she earned her black belt 5 years earlier. The certificate was dated 8 months ago. I said nothing. On the drive home, I kept thinking about it. My mother had always needed people to believe she was stronger than everyone else. I had assumed it was just insecurity. Maybe it was more complicated. The next morning, she called me before 7. "Your shoulder okay?" I looked at the phone for a moment. "Fine. You sure?" "Yeah." She paused. Then she asked, almost casually, "Where did you learn that move?" I leaned against the kitchen counter. "I don't know what you mean." "You know exactly what I mean." Her voice had lost the joking tone from yesterday. I told her I had to get ready for work. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me all morning. "You've been hiding things from this family, Ethan." I didn't answer. Because she was right. She just had no idea how much I had been hiding. My mother called again that evening. This time she didn't ask about my shoulder. She asked where I had learned to fight. I told her I'd taken some self-defense classes years ago. She laughed. "That's not what I saw." I stayed quiet. Then she said, "I know you're not working in logistics." That got my attention. I sat down at the kitchen table. "What do you think I do?" She hesitated. "I think you're military." I didn't confirm it. She kept talking anyway. She said she'd noticed the way I carried myself. The way I scanned rooms. The way I never sat with my back to a door. She had even noticed that I stopped using my real work address for family paperwork. I asked why she had been watching me that closely. She didn't answer. Instead, she told me something I hadn't expected. She wasn't actually a black belt. The certificate belonged to someone else. She had paid a former instructor to let her train privately and exaggerate her experience around the family. She wanted everyone to believe she was the strongest person in the room. I asked why. Her answer was quiet. Because people listen to strong people. I looked at the phone in my hand. Then she asked the question she had been building toward. "Are you Army?" I finally said, "Yes." She went silent. I added one more sentence. "But you still don't know what I do." And for the first time, My mother sounded genuinely afraid. The next morning, my mother showed up at my house without calling. I saw her car through the kitchen window. She stood on my porch for almost a full minute before knocking. When I opened the door, she looked different. Not weaker. Just careful. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked straight to the kitchen and sat at the same table where we'd talked the night before. "I shouldn't have hit you," she said. "No. I was trying to embarrass you." "I know." She looked down at her hands. That was the closest I'd ever seen her come to admitting she had crossed a line. Then she asked, "What kind of army?" I didn't answer. She kept guessing. "Infantry. Rangers. Special operations." Each time I stayed quiet. Finally she said, "You're special forces, aren't you?" I looked at her. She swallowed. I told her that part of my work wasn't something I discussed with family. Not because I thought I was important, but because loose details could become someone else's problem. She nodded slowly. Then she surprised me. "I lied because I wanted you to respect me." I leaned back in my chair. "You never needed a black belt for that." She looked at me for a long time. Then she asked whether I hated her. I told her no. But I also told her something else. Trust wasn't something I could give back just because she had apologized. And that was when she finally understood the real consequence of what she'd done. My mother asked me not to tell the family. I hadn't planned to. The whole point of keeping my work private was to avoid becoming a story people told at dinner. But there was one problem. My uncle had recorded the incident. He sent me the video that afternoon. I watched it once. My mother walked toward me through the punch and I moved before anyone else reacted. The footage ended with me controlling her arm. There was nothing dramatic about it. That made it more convincing. My mother called 10 minutes later. "Please delete that. I can't control what your brother does with it." She sighed. Then she admitted something else. She had been telling relatives that I was unemployed between deployments. That explained several strange comments I'd heard over the years. She had made my absence sound like failure because she didn't want anyone asking why I disappeared for months. I asked why she cared so much about controlling the story. She said, "Because once people think you're weak, they treat you differently." I understood then. She wasn't really afraid of me. She was afraid of losing the image she'd built. So I made one decision. I wouldn't expose her. I wouldn't humiliate her. I would simply let the truth exist if someone asked. That evening my uncle called. He said the family wanted everyone together the following weekend. My mother had apparently told them she had something important to explain. I knew what that meant. The video was already spreading. The family gathered at my uncle's house the following Saturday. Nobody mentioned the video at first. My mother sat beside my aunt, unusually quiet. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Then my uncle put his phone on the table. "I think everyone deserves the truth." My mother closed her eyes for a second. The video played. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a comment about my reaction. They just watched. When it ended, my uncle looked at me. "So what do you actually do?" I looked around the room. I could have told them everything. Instead, I gave them the answer I was allowed to give. "I serve in Army Special Forces." The room went completely still. My cousin stared at me. My aunt covered her mouth. My mother looked down. Then my uncle asked how long. "Long enough." That was all I said. My mother finally spoke. I made him look weak because I couldn't stand that everyone respected him without him asking for it. Nobody defended her. She wasn't crying. Neither was I. She just looked tired. After a few minutes, she turned toward me. "I was wrong." I nodded. "I know." That was when I realized revenge wasn't going to feel like winning. The real consequence was much quieter. Everyone had finally seen the difference between pretending to be strong and actually having nothing to prove. My mother looked at me once more. Then she asked if I could forgive her. I didn't answer immediately. Because forgiveness wasn't the part she needed to hear. I told my mother I could forgive her. But forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing happened. She nodded. For once, she didn't argue. Over the next few months, things became quieter between us. She stopped talking about fighting. She stopped telling people stories about my job. When relatives asked questions, she simply said, "That's his business." That was enough. I also stopped hiding behind silence when something bothered me. Not because I suddenly wanted attention. I just realized that keeping peace and keeping boundaries were two different things. A few months later, my mother asked me to show her the move I'd used that day. I smiled. "No." She laughed. "Fair enough." We sat on her porch drinking coffee. For the first time in years, she didn't need to prove anything to me. And I didn't need to prove anything to her. She eventually apologized again, but this time she didn't ask for forgiveness afterward. She just said, "I should have respected you before I knew what you did." I looked at her and said, "You should have respected me because I'm your son." She nodded. That was the moment I knew something had actually changed. People think strength is about knowing how to win a fight. It isn't. Sometimes strength is knowing you could embarrass someone completely and choosing not to. I never told my family the details of my work. I didn't need to. They had already learned the part that mattered. And my mother never raised a fist at me again. She didn't have to. She finally understood who she had been standing in front of all along.